The slap came so fast, I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the elegant banquet hall floor as 130 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, had just slapped me on her wedding day because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed at me in front of everyone. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves, but no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor old mother-in-law, who had just been publicly humiliated. My son Nathan stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Rebecca continued, smoothing her pristine wedding gown. "Nathan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were pure venom. For months, I had endured her condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life. But this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes on me, like sharp daggers. Tears streamed down my face, but inside something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow, it was the final straw. For years, I had kept a low profile, living with humility and discretion. I had secrets no one, not even my own son, knew. Memories of the last few months began to bombard my mind as I slowly walked toward the exit. I remembered when Rebecca first came to my apartment 2 years ago. Her face fell when she saw my modest home, my old furniture, my small kitchen. "Seriously, this is where Nathan's mom lives?" she had asked him, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. From that moment on, every visit had been a silent torture. "Victoria, you should move to a smaller place," she had told me 3 months ago during a family dinner. "At your age, you can't maintain such a big apartment. Besides, Nathan and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need more space." Her fake smile didn't fool anyone except my son, who seemed to lose his personality whenever she spoke, acting like a puppet on a string. The humiliations had escalated gradually. First, it was the comments about my clothes. Then it was about my car. Next, it was my part-time job at the local flower shop. Each phrase was a small poison dagger stabbing at my self-esteem. "My name is Victoria Montgomery. I am 68 years old, and all my life I have been a woman who prefers discretion over ostentation. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 10-year-old car. I buy my clothes at discount store. To the outside world, especially to Rebecca, I am just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I have carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband passed. My husband, William, had not been the office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth a secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked out of the banquet hall, the guests' conversations followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing. She looks so fragile," whispered Rebecca's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," added Nathan's cousin. "She should be in a retirement home, not living alone." Another guest commented with false compassion. Each word was like acid pouring on open wounds. The cool temperature of the banquet hall's air conditioning contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat in my chest. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse, a purse I had used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I had learned to value practicality over appearances, something my daughter-in-law would clearly never understand. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. "Michael, it's Victoria. I need you to come to the Grand Oak Banquet Hall immediately." "Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth." My voice trembled, but there was a firmness in it I hadn't felt in a long time. "Are you sure, Mrs. Montgomery?" Michael asked with his professional but concerned voice. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." I glanced back at the banquet hall one last time, where I could see Rebecca laughing with her friends, likely telling them how she had put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Nathan was by her side, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse for what he had just witnessed. "Completely sure," I replied. 30 minutes, Michael. No more." I hung up the phone and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to drop the mask I had used to protect my family. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Victoria Montgomery. And when that happened, when reality hit their perfect fake worlds, they would understand the true meaning of the word regret. The parking lot was quiet, lit by streetlights that cast long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan and waited. 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been taking care of them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited in my car, memories of how I had reached this moment began to flood my mind like an unstoppable avalanche. It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago, when Nathan came to my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from when he was a boy. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he had told me. And there she was, Rebecca, with her perfectly styled hair, her designer clothes, and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked at my apartment, evaluating every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. "How cozy," she had murmured as she looked at my second-hand furniture and my faded curtains. Her tone suggested the opposite. Nathan, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in her voice. That first dinner had been a silent disaster. Rebecca barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked her about her family, she gave evasive answers, but not before asking me about my financial situation with a curiosity that I found alarming. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Victoria? It must be hard to get by on so little money," she had said with fake concern. What Rebecca didn't know was that I had been observing her as much as she had been observing me. Over the next few months, I began to notice patterns that put me on high alert. Every time they visited my apartment, she would make comments about how outdated everything was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always lingered on the details that really mattered: the prime location of the building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Nathan was in the bathroom, I heard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, his mom's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we have our own place. She's so naive she'll probably even thank us for helping her with the transition." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I maintained my composure when she returned to the living room, feigning innocence. From that moment on, every interaction with Rebecca became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, worried about her mother-in-law's well-being, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivation. It was like a game of chess, where we both thought we were winning. The following months brought a gradual escalation in her attempts at manipulation. First, there were the subtle suggestions about senior living community. Then came the more direct pressures about my age and supposed vulnerabilities. Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent and helpless. Nathan, my own son, began to echo the same phrases like a trained parrot. Seeing him gradually transform into that woman's puppet was more painful than any direct insult. The son I had raised with so much love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Rebecca had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities, but I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Rebecca and Nathan were neck-deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple, it was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems, and my apartment located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I had raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited, instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. That night, I had made a decision that would change everything. I called Michael, my financial advisor and the only man I had completely trusted since my husband William's death. And now, sitting in my car in the banquet hall parking lot, waiting for Michael to arrive with the documents that would change everything, I realized the moment of truth had come. 25 more minutes, and Rebecca, Nathan and all those guests who had looked at me with pity would discover who Victoria Montgomery really was. 25 more minutes, and their perfect worlds built on lies and greed would crumble like sandcastles. The night breeze rustled the tree leaves around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows under the lights. It was strangely poetic that on such a beautiful night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call to Michael, and every second felt like an eternity. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the banquet hall, hear the cheerful music and laughter spilling out of the open windows. It was surreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main players. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest humiliation had happened just 2 weeks before the wedding during what Rebecca had called an important family meeting. She had arrived at my apartment, accompanied not only by Nathan, but also by her parents. A perfectly planned ambush. Their words were rehearsed too perfect to be spontaneous. Nathan had remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the son I had raised die before my eyes. The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Rebecca took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. The audacity of this 28-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me, the absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decision. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. There it was, the naked raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. The implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. They had done their research. They had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years. Not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. The results of that investigation had been devastating. Nathan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Rebecca worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $24,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 a month was 3 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed with payments that took up 60% of their combined income. Their main credit card was maxed out and they had started using cash advances to pay other debts. They were in a financial freefall, and my apartment represented their only hope of salvation. But there was something else in Michael's report that had completely broken my heart. For the past 6 months, Nathan had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies, asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been asking about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information had come at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Michael had hired, Rebecca had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable properties and no competitive heirs. To her, marrying Nathan wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final straw. For weeks I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood that it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about pure calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding had been torture. Every phone call from Nathan was a new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Rebecca included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started to treat me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Nathan had made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Rebecca just wants what's best for all of us." His words had been the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. The man who was getting married the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. And now, sitting in my car waiting for Michael, I realized that everything had led to this inevitable moment. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty, it was about justice. It was about showing them the consequences of their actions. It was about teaching them that some lines should never have been crossed. 15 more minutes, and everything would change forever. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Frank, my neighbor from the apartment next door, a 70-year-old man who had been a silent witness to all the tense visits of the last few months. "Frank, it's Victoria. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice shaking. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes, right now. It's urgent." Frank had been like a brother to me since William passed away, and I knew I could trust him without him asking questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Frank just a week earlier. He had witnessed from his balcony when Rebecca arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. Frank had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Nathan's behavior over the last few months. His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Frank for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that William and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Frank appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Victoria, what's going on? You look very upset," he asked, as he handed me the documents. I explained briefly what had happened in the banquet hall, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it. Frank, in a few minutes a man named Michael will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Frank, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you have always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. As Frank returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated monthly rent of The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years ago. William had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into a silent empire. Together we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family security. "Visible wealth attracts problems," William used to say. "Invisible wealth gives you power," I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked to stay active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Rebecca so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where William and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Nathan and Rebecca. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent that he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Nathan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding that was taking place at that very moment, had been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $5,500 that had kept the sinking ship of Nathan's financial life afloat. Money he thought came from work bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his irresponsible decisions. The irony was devastating. While Rebecca was humiliating me for being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to strip me of my apartment to solve their financial problems, I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the banquet hall once more. The lights were still shining, the music was still playing, the guests were still celebrating, but in less than 5 minutes, Michael would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This is about teaching them that actions have consequences, that greed has a price, that family is not something you can sell for economic convenience. I had tried to protect Nathan from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable. Headlights of a car approached the parking lot, illuminating the night with a white light that momentarily blinded me. It was Michael, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Victoria I had been, and closer to the woman I needed to become. Mrs. Montgomery, Michael said as he got out of his car, a legal brief under his arm. Are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what is about to happen. I looked toward the banquet hall one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. I have never been more sure of something in my life, Michael. It's time for them to meet the real Victoria Montgomery. Michael opened his folder under the parking lot light and began to show me the documents he had prepared with his characteristic efficiency. I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread that I had carefully woven for years to protect my son, and now I was cutting those threads one by one. The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Nathan and Rebecca's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding that was taking place at that very moment, had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support definitively. Michael, I want you to understand something, I said to him, as I signed each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long, I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize. His words gave me the final strength I needed to take the last step. We walked together toward the banquet hall entrance, and with each step I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost, and anticipation for what I was about to regain: my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when we entered the banquet hall. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, and I could see the confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized Michael immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant that something important was about to happen. Rebecca was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" she yelled at me from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photos with Nathan. "You already left one. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried that arrogance I had come to know so well, but I could detect a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Nathan Montgomery and Mrs. Rebecca Dawson." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests began to pull out their cell phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Nathan slowly approached, his face pale and his eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked me in a voice that no longer sounded as confident as it had when he had humiliated me just minutes before. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he had had since childhood. "Nathan," I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in months, "this is Michael Thompson, my financial and legal advisor. He has come to deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Michael opened his folder and took out the first document. "Miss Nathan Montgomery, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately canceled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Nathan's face. "Financial guarantee," he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. "Also," Michael continued relentlessly, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Rebecca let out a gasp that echoed throughout the banquet hall. "That's impossible," she exclaimed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "Nathan doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing fascination. Finally, Michael said, taking the last document from his folder, "The guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. The banquet hall management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words fell on the banquet hall like a bomb, and I could see some guests nervously begin to move toward the exits. The realization hit Nathan like a hammer. "You," he muttered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. "You've been all this time. You've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the small boy he had once been, vulnerable and confused. "For 3 years, Nathan," I confirmed in a voice that sounded strangely calm after the emotional storm I had been living through. 3 years in which I thought I was helping you get through a difficult time. 3 years in which I believed you would eventually recover and become the man I raised. 3 years in which I hoped you would remember the values I taught you." Rebecca began to pace in circles, clutching her head with increasing desperation. "This can't be real," she screamed, as the guests watched her with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You can't have money. Appearances are deceiving, Rebecca," I said finally, feeling decades of careful performance come to an end. For years I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. It's just that the problems came from where we least expected them. The music had stopped completely, and the only sound in the banquet hall was the agitated breathing of the newlyweds and the growing murmurs of the guests, who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something completely unexpected. Some were already recording with their phones, instinctively knowing that this story would become urban legend. "Mom," Nathan said, his voice broken, "please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just money or financial support. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35. "The only way to fix this, Nathan," I replied, "was not to break it in the first place." The silence in the banquet hall became deafening. 130 guests held their breath as they processed what they had just heard. Rebecca stood motionless for the first time all night, her eyes darting between Michael, the documents, and my face, as if trying to find a crack in the reality that was collapsing around her. Nathan just stared at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of shock, belated comprehension, and absolute horror. "Mrs. Montgomery," Michael said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial detail?" His question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. I could see several guests moving closer, fascinated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. "Please, Michael," I replied with a serenity I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Rebecca tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Michael raised a hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. "Over the last 36 months, Michael began consulting his documents. Mrs. Victoria Montgomery has transferred a total of $62,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Nathan Montgomery, and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses." A collective murmur swept through the banquet hall. Some guests exchanged glances of astonishment. Others pulled out calculators on their phones to verify the figures. Rebecca's mother, who had remained seated at the head table throughout the confrontation, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. Furthermore, Michael continued relentlessly, "Mrs. Montgomery personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the banquet hall, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of money which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses." Rebecca finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than coherent words. "This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a pauper." She turned to the guests as if looking for support, but found only fascinated faces, and some who were clearly amused by her desperation. Nathan finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. "Mom, please. There has to be an explanation. There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain that almost made me waver. "Destroy your life?" I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me again. "I'm destroying your life? Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home?" The truth of my words resonated in the banquet hall like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos on their phones of the slap Rebecca had given me, digital evidence of the cruelty that had triggered this revelation. "But that was different," Nathan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help." His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice rising for the first time all night. You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home? You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge? You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate? With each question, Nathan's posture shrank. Michael took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his folder. Miss Montgomery, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets that were previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse. The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Rebecca staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. You can't do that, she shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling completely. We're your family. Nathan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight, I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her own wedding day? My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests flinch. Rebecca's father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly disguised panic. Mrs. Montgomery, I think we're all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit. His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. There's nothing to discuss in private, I replied firmly. Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public. The guests' heads moved between us as if watching a tennis match. Absorbed in every exchange, Michael closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the banquet hall. Mrs. Montgomery, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately. He turned to Nathan and Rebecca with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible. Rebecca finally collapsed. She literally dropped into a nearby chair and began to cry with uncontrolled sobs that echoed through the banquet hall. Everything is ruined, she murmured through her tears. Everything we planned, everything we worked for, it's all destroyed. Her wedding dress, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and stained with tears. No, I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences. I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Nathan went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Rebecca, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do. There is a way to fix this, Nathan, I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly, because despite everything he was still my son, but that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You will have to do it the hard way like everyone else does. The banquet hall remained in absolute silence, every person present knowing that they were witnessing the definitive end of a family relationship. Michael and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a banquet hall full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. And as I walked out into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, free from the burden of protecting people who didn't appreciate it, free from the weight of enabling destructive behavior, free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. The price had been high, my relationship with my son, but I had gained something far more valuable: my dignity, my self-respect, and the knowledge that I would never again allow anyone to treat me as less than I deserved. Sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries. Sometimes the hardest lesson to teach is through consequence. And sometimes, walking away is the only way to save yourself. As I drove home that night, I knew that whatever happened next, I had made the right choice. Not the easy choice, but the right one, and that was enough. If you found it compelling, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my situation? Would you have acted differently, or would you have made the same choice? Please subscribe to stay updated with more stories like this one. Your support means everything and helps me continue sharing these powerful narratives.